Hi, Katie. This is just kind of a brief walkthrough of the different technology systems that we have in place right now. So ultimately, there are three that I'm going to go over: CommCareHQ, OpenFN, and Salesforce. And to start with overall, right, we have the phones which have the CommCare app on them. When those phones get synced, it then comes into CommCare HQ. And from an administrative perspective, CommCare HQ is where everything happens. So, typically when I'm in CommCare HQ, I'm coming in here to one, come to the applications tab, and I might manage our CAS application. These other ones you see here, CAS Congo and CAS Madagascar, these are older versions from the piloting phase, and this SMS one was just for testing. But where we're managing CAS going forward is from this CAS application. So when you're in here, it's best to go over some app building tutorials from Demagi. But, essentially we have different modules that are set up here, and then we have the forms that live within them. So if we needed to make a change, you would do it from here. So let's say for the register new patient form, we wanted to add a question, or you wanted to modify a question. You would need to first click on the relevant form that you want to be modifying, or kind of where that question lives. And then it would come here, and you could scroll through here and find the relevant question. And then if you wanted to change patient's first name, kind of the way it displays, or if you wanted to modify the translation, you could do this one-off from here. And there are other things that you can do around display conditions and validation conditions, and whether there should be a default value. And so I think the best thing really to do is to always kind of just look through what's already been built and to see how it was done looking through this screen, and then to replicate it, or kind of to learn from it, to modify it. So the main forms that we have are register new patient, we have our log a visit, which is up here under today's appointments. We also have the other forms that are around missed appointments and kind of the future appointment contact, and so you can modify those from here. We have our edit patient record, and we have mark patient stop treatment. And then, everything else you're seeing is basically, the icons that you see in CAST that correlates to today's appointments and today's completed visits, etc. And then there are forms that live within them that the user would be directed to, and so then that can be managed from here, modifying those questions and the order, whether they're required, what sort of validation we have in place. That's all managed directly within the form. And if you needed to add a new question, you could use this add question button and choose the question type from there. There are some settings you can also modify if you click this wrench icon. So for instance, for doing translations in the future, you can manage that from this page, and you would want to do your app translation. So you could download the existing file, and then once that's been updated with a new language, for instance, you can then upload that back. There's a lot more documentation that you can find on this from Demagi, so really best to read through that first and then proceed. You can also, if you're directly on hover over a form, you can also see this wrench icon here for doing settings. So these are some details about how this register a new patient form affects the patient case, how it updates it or how it creates it. So we see that this creates a new case, the patient case, and it gives when to do it. It also maps the questions in the forms to case properties, and so you can control that mapping here. And so you could go through for every form and look at this closer. It's honestly not something that I've gotten into too much, but again, I'm sure that you can find some documentation kind of directly from Demagi if needed to look into it more. I wanted to see. So just essentially that there's some different settings, basically anything related to the cast app that you need to do for kind of modifying it in some way, you're most likely going to do it from this cast application. And if you're in doubt about how to do something, the first best thing to do is to contact Demagi support using this question icon and report an issue. But also hopefully we'll have that Demagi resource who will be able to help advise and give some instruction as well on how to make changes if needed within CommCare. So we have our application here that we can manage. We also have the users that get managed. So we have mobile workers, which are the logins that are used for the phones. So typically the way we've been setting it up in a lot of our countries is that we have 1 to 2 phones per clinic, and these are generic users or generic kind of logins that are shared among clinic workers. And so, for instance, if we have for Uganda a clinic named Arua, we have 2 logins set up for them, Arua01 and Arua02. And the goal is that there's one phone that's designated for 01, and it's always going to be logged in as 01, and there's a second form that's designated as phone 2, and it's always going to be logged in as phone 2. And we really want to make sure that both phones are never logged in with the same user, because an issue we run into is that they both could, if they're both offline, they're not communicating with each other. And so if they both register a patient, both of the patients that they register are going to have the same cast ID, for instance, because they both would see the previous patient that was registered as 02, let's say, and then the next one they would register as 03, and they wouldn't have any communication with the other phone to know that that other phone had also registered as 03. So things like that can come up, why we really want to keep them separate. So you can kind of manage those users from here. You can create new workers. You could also kind of mass create new users or mass modify mobile workers by using this download mobile workers, and then you can do a bulk upload. You also see that we have these user fields here, and so these are some things that were added just specifically for MiracleFeet for CAS, so kind of managing the country code, the phone code. So this is all managed here, and as new countries come on, you'll need to add country values here and country code. You'll need to add the phone code, and everything else can stay the same. And then we also have our web users, and so our web users are people who can log in directly to CommCareHQ, and you can manage who has that access here. We have a few different roles. Admin is basically you can do anything, including accessing the app, so we really do want to keep this limited just to kind of MiracleFeet headquarters, people who should be responsible for that, probably yourself and Caroline and maybe Christy, and that should be all who should have the admin role. So probably some of this could stand to be cleaned up. Field implementer is kind of what we think of for our country coordinators. And so this is basically giving them, you can choose what ability they have, such as if they could edit mobile workers, or if they could edit our location structure, or if they can edit data. And then we also have one for field implementer, no location. So this means that they can do anything that the field implementer role can do, but they can't edit our organization structure, such as creating new countries and provinces and clinics. And it's just because when they have that ability, they can see everything for all countries. And so we do kind of want to limit who has access to do that, and only someone who really knows what they're doing and who we trust to be doing. So for instance, I have Adriani on this field implementer role, but I wouldn't necessarily want to put every country coordinator immediately with the ability to modify locations. I probably would only want to do it for those who really pick up CommCareHQ quite well and are technically minded, and for whom it makes sense to give that responsibility, and kind of limiting it to just a few people. If I jump, so if we're in our organization structure, this is where we're managing basically our clinics, and we're organizing them country and then some sort of regional province, and then the clinics live under that, and there's more instruction on how to manage this. If I'm looking at my reports, there's a training manual that's being set up that will give more on this, but essentially this is a place to be able to monitor if people are using the application, how often they're syncing the phones. There's going to be kind of some more detailed instruction on this that I won't go into in this video, but this is essentially a place where you can monitor the mobile worker activity for using the phone and for submitting forms and for making modifications to cases. Another really key thing I look at is under managed deployments, the application status. And if you wanted to, let's say for one country, to look to see whether they're kind of syncing the phones and submitting data, you can come here and then you can see your users and you can see when they last submitted a form, which means that the phone had internet connection and submitted it. And last sync means that they physically press the sync button in the phone. And so syncing is the only way that they can get information from other phones or from CommCareHQ. So we want to see both that they're sending data, but also that they're syncing the phones to see full usage. And if it gets to something like Jinja, where we see they haven't synced in 3 weeks or 1 month ago, right? Following up with them to understand why that is, if they're having issues with the phone, if they're not using it for some reason, and just reminding them as well about syncing. So I had sent an email to them yesterday about making sure to sync the phones, and it would be good to follow up with them on that. The last thing to go over is kind of data management. So if we use our data tab, this is where we can export data to work with it more, or let's say to modify. So typically I'm not doing anything with the form export, but I do often export cases. So export patients and visits, and that might be just to better analyze the information that we have, but it might also be that I need to make a mass update. And so first I'm going to export those patients. And if I did project data, that means everything that lives within this MiracleFeet project space. If I wanted to do only a certain country, for instance, I could just search for that country, and just making sure that we use this location, using something with the location afterwards. And then for date range, I could specify everything that was ever created since this project space was set up in August 2017. Or I might, just want to say anything that was created or modified in the last 30 days. And then you could just click prepare export, and then it will export, and you can work with it further from there. If we go back to our just kind of export view, so if you ever want to modify what data comes out, you can always click edit. Well, it's being quite slow right now, but this is where you would edit what columns are in your export file. And then if we just come over here to, let's go to the lookup tables first. So the lookup tables are kind of our location tables within CAST. That'll vary by country in terms of what sort of kind of regional levels are available. And so we can view that and also manage it from here. And there are more instructions on how to do this for the country setup documentation. And so we can do that under here. We can also, under edit data, that's where we can import information into CommCare. So for instance, again, there's documentation that lives elsewhere that will talk about importing ICR data into CommCare. And then the last thing to go over is that if there needs to be a transfer of cases from one owner to another, such as kind of a patient changed locations, you would do that from here. And this is, again, something where there's more documentation that lives in the trainer manual on how to do it. So I'm not going to go over that all right now. But if you need to do that in the future, you can come here and you can, of course, kind of read up more on Damagi's documentation on how to reassign cases as well, such as if you need to, in this case, we're talking about changing which clinic owns it. Okay, and so that covers the main features of CommCare. And I definitely recommend looking into the documentation Damagi has. They have a lot online, and also making use of their support team as well as needed.